When I say the name Theodore Link, a lot of things come to mind, but when it comes to a cornerstone of St. Louis architecture and our infrastructure, I think it's Union Station.
It is. It is. So I'm going to take us back to the 1830s, the port of St. Louis. You had over 150 steamboats lined up for miles waiting to unload at the port of St. Louis.
Right.
Made us a very attractive economic destination. And then you would have, I'm going to leapfrog into the 20th century, airports.
International Airport.
Well, exactly. A major metropolitan city cannot thrive without having an airport as a hub. So in between there, let's go to the late 19th century, early 20th century, railroad terminals.
It's railroad.
It's the port of entry. It's the airport of its time.
I can dig it.
I can dig it.
This is the Can You Dig It podcast. We crawl into the crypts, gardens, and forgotten cemeteries. Join Dan Fuller, your resident cemetery chronicler, and Joe Shields, the plot-loving development exec, as we unearth the dark secrets of St. Louis and Bellefontaine Cemetery and beyond. From garden geeks to history buffs with a taste for the macabre, as well as fans of iconography, this is your podcast. We love diving deep into the shadows of history. Let's dig in.
We are at the beautiful visitor center in historic Forest Park, St. Louis, Missouri today, outdoors. And it is my distinct pleasure to be talking today with Dan Fuller, the cemetery chronicler for Bellefontaine Cemetery and Arboretum in St. Louis. Hey, Dan.
And the person who just made that wonderful introduction is Joe Shields, our development officer, also with Bellefontaine Cemetery. But this is where I have to throw in that little extra, who began as a volunteer just a short handful of years ago and has grown in his duties and responsibilities and is an integral part of Bellefontaine Cemetery.
Well, that's a very nice thing to say. I can dig it.
All right. We just hope everybody else can, too.
They can. I'm confident they will.
So what are we going to talk about today out in the beauty of nature?
You know what? Just scanning out at Forest Park, that's buzzing with activity. It's like the weather is just beautiful today. And I'm seeing a bunch of vehicles drive by. So let's talk about transportation.
Transportation.
That's a great subject to talk about.
Transportation, constantly changing. But before we get into the real focus, what was there before?
What was there before transportation?
Where we're going, what was there before?
On premise.
At Union Station.
What was on the property before the building?
Yeah.
Before 1894?
Yeah. And it's one of your favorite topics.
Oh, it's the World's Fair.
No.
I'm just kidding. I don't know what was on property.
Joseph Urich Brewing Company.
Well, that's the best first name ever.
Yeah. So it was a brewery location.
Urich's Cave.
Urich's Cave was up the street and accessible by an underground rail,
but
which
the brewery
we'll get to.
Was there.
But the brewery was there.
Okay.
And Urich is one of those beer barons that are so important to Bellefontaine Cemetery. But it, like many things, will have to make way for cutting-edge transportation of its time. And, of course, what we're talking about is Union Station. The first Union Station.
Really?
Yeah. And you know why it's called Union Station?
I don't.
So what it amounts to is before our Union Station used to come in on basically the Wabash train, and you'd stop at the Wabash station. If you had to transfer, you'd have to get in your little horse and buggy and head on over to the Union Pacific. Ours was the first one under one location. It was a union of all those different rail lines. And so, of course, once we did it, everybody else wanted to do that. So Chicago came online, New York. So we, again, in St. Louis, were cutting edge.
And as we've mentioned in prior episodes, St. Louis is a city of firsts. So not only did we have this beautiful terminal in 1894, it was the largest in the world, servicing the most people in the world.
Yep. And again, this is part of the infrastructure. You kind of jumped the gun a little bit with your World's Fair. But, you know, down the line, we were going to have this 1903 World's Fair. And how are most of those 20 million people going to get there? They're going to get here by train. If you didn't know, our World's Fair was postponed a year to 1904, but that's yet another story, maybe down the line. But by 1894, Union Station, designed by Theodore Link, is up and running, and quite a hub of activity. Can you imagine what it was like to have all those different trains from different rail lines pulling in, exchange of people and cargo heading out again from the gateway to the west?
There's something romantic about train stations and old, I should say, 19th century rail car transportation because of how it evolved. The people involved with designing the upgrades. The way that the locomotives have evolved from steam to diesel, and just the service that you received on a train. I've experienced this in Europe with changing trains in and out and around Italy. I've actually had the pleasure of myself and my girlfriend running towards a train and having we were late, of course, and having the conductor blowing his whistle, hanging out the side of it, motioning to us. First of all, I'm sure he's thinking unsavory things about us, but we had to run to the train and then throw our bags and jump on the car. It was like something out of a movie.
Yeah. That infamous Harry Truman picture where he's hanging off the back of the train after basically they said that someone else won that presidential election. That was done here in St. Louis at Union Station in that wonderful garage, that wonderful space that we still have. It's repurposed now, and I think that is important because just as Urick's Brewing Company gave way for Union Station, the structure is still there because it's such an iconic piece of architecture, but now it is a hotel, a place of coming together because it's so central to where, of course, our blues play. A lot of people jump over there before they head onto a blues game, and now sandwiched in between the newest thing in St. Louis, and that's soccer.
And the soccer park, not to derail the conversation from, pun intended, from Union Station, but St. Louis City Soccer Park was just named one of the most beautiful, it's either soccer parks or sports venues, period, on the globe, which I have to give props to the ownership group who researched that and built that. It's such an addition to downtown. And
again, you have this wonderful juxtaposition between this modern stadium soccer, somewhat new to St. Louis, although we've always had deep soccer roots, but now you've got that 1894 station there, so, in its Romanesque architecture, so solidified in the fabric of St. Louis, kind of holding its weight, even though you've got this new piece of architecture there. And this is where I kind of double back to Theodore Link. Link was an important architect for not just St. Louis, but for the region. He would do things as far as Mississippi. Their state building in Jackson, Mississippi was designed by him. He did do some buildings for the 1904 World's Fair, which of course we always kind of come back to, and did quite a bit more, but he is St. Louis's own, and of course laid to rest at Bellefontaine Cemetery.
Yeah. Like you had said, Dan, his work it extends from St. Louis to the south. It would go as far as Louisiana State University. Mm-hmm. And if I could take us back just a little bit, steamboats are becoming obsolete. The railroads are taking over the United States. So the railroads play a huge part in the success of St. Louis as a metropolitan area in the mid to late 19th century. I had the pleasure, it seems like a lifetime ago, of driving freight trains for Union Pacific. And when I was a conductor, St. Louis was the 5th busiest rail hub in the United States.
Wow.
Because for me to pick up a train at, let's say, Dupo, Illinois, right across the river, East St. Louis at the Alton Southern Yard, to go from the destination where we picked up a train and maybe go 5 miles, it might take 7 hours. Because 5 railroads converge on St. Louis,
right.
At least 5 major railroads. You had Amtrak that usually got in the way. Amtrak was like an annoying little brother. Because contractually the railroads have to work around Amtrak to make it, viable. And So anyway, it would take sometimes hours and hours and hours just to go a few miles because of all the congestion coming into St. Louis.
Right.
And I can't imagine what that would have looked like 100 plus years before.
Yeah, and just think about it. Coming from the east, coming to St. Louis, you had to cross that thing called the Mississippi River.
And what bridge crosses the Mississippi River?
And that was done in 1874, just a mere 20 years before Union Station is built. And so you got to know that one comes before the other, that prior to that there was this, and I think a lot of people have forgotten about that, but all of those trains disassembled at the river's edge and would be ferried across. So you think you had to wait now?
Oh, no.
Just imagine what it would have been there.
I have zero patience. That would have killed me.
But then in 1874, Eads Bridge opens up and is a smoother transition from one side of the river to the other, and most appropriate then, as you were saying, with all these gatherings of the trains, that Union Station would be put in place. So that would just grease the wheels for all of that transportation and the move further west. Again, being redundant, but the gateway to the west.
You know, Dan, there's so much railroad history in St. Louis and inside of Bellefontaine. And you know what? We're going to talk about that when we come back. We're going to take a short break.
Yeah, this sounds like a good time to make a break.
Yes.
Podcasts are a powerful tool to reach your target market in today's digital age. Here's why. Listeners can tune in whenever and wherever they want, fitting your podcast seamlessly into their lives. Unlike videos, podcasts don't require full attention, allowing listeners to multitask while absorbing your message. Podcasts foster a more intimate and personal connection with your audience compared to text-based content. Podcasts allow you to niche down and target a specific audience with interests directly relevant to your message. Now, why launch your podcast with EG Media Group? EG Media Group is a one-stop shop for all your podcasting needs. We are here to help you with strategic planning. We'll develop a plan to reach your target audience and achieve your podcasting goals. Our team will ensure your podcast sounds professional and polished. We'll help you get your podcast out there and reach new listeners. So, if you're looking to leverage the power of podcasting to connect with your target market, visit egmediagroup.com today and turn your podcasting dream into a reality. That's egmediagroup.com. EG Media Group. Create, connect, convert.
And welcome back to the Can You Dig It podcast. My name is Joe Shields. I'm the Director of Development for Bellefontaine Cemetery and Arboretum in beautiful St. Louis, and it is my distinct pleasure again to continue a conversation with Dan Fuller, our amazing chronicler for the cemetery.
Yeah, and everybody asks me, what does that mean? And I like to tell them, we're still trying to figure it out, but I've been given the opportunity now to really focus on our history at Bellefontaine, and I know that's what we're going to dive into in this second half.
Yes. So railroads, vital transportation component of 19th century United States and St. Louis. Out of the 89,000 residents at Bellefontaine, there are an amazing number of people who pioneered the railroad business in St. Louis. We have Mr. Adolphus Bush with the Merchants Railroad. We have Captain John J. Mitchell with the Alton Southern Railroad.
George Taylor coming in with, what will morph over time, Union Pacific to the Union Railroad today.
What these people accomplished, what they saw, but the adventure of bringing railroads, to the middle of the United States and then taking them out west. It's a story that needs to be told, and we're going to, tell a little bit of that story today, and hopefully in future episodes we'll be able to drill down on some of these specific companies.
Yeah, and again, at the center of it, not as much today. I know I love that little brother. I think he even said little annoying brother Amtrak aspect. But in its heyday with Union Station, it's the trains, but even more important, it's the people. We talked just a little bit about the fact that Harry Truman made his presentation of Dewey Winds on the back of a rail car there at Union Station. But just think about the number one USO station in the United States during World War II was at Union Station.
I didn't know that.
All of those men going back and forth, whether it be the Pacific or the war theater in Europe, St. Louis is again that hub, and so they're moving back and forth through that. We have a wonderful lady at the cemetery, Mary Rexford, who was in charge of the over 700 volunteers who would keep those men going where they needed to go. And just imagine that whole epicenter there at Union Station, underneath that wonderful tent, if you will, as far as the train shed and then all the other activity that's going on there. So it was almost like, if you stop to think about it, it was almost like a heartbeat in St. Louis, just this constant 24/7 juggernaut of activity, making sure people were getting where they needed to go.
When is the last time you've been on a train?
Oh, it's been a while. I used to make a pretty regular trip from St. Louis area up to Chicago. And, there's been the rumors of putting something in high efficiency for a little while there. So I'd love to see that happen. And, unfortunately, the trains aren't in Union Station proper, but they go right by. And, for those that wish to partake, every year in the holiday time period, there is a special train that leaves Union Station still today.
This is the Polar Express.
Have you done that one?
I have not.
You have not? So, the Polar Express. I mean, you can't ask for something more poignant to still be active coming out of that station. So there's the heartbeat's a little bit more quiet. You have to really listen to it, but it's still there. And the hope is that maybe someday we'll get a little bit more of that back, too.
I think we will. Public transportation is a must. In other metropolitan areas, it's so much more vibrant than it is here. This year I've been to New York, Chicago, New Orleans, and their transit authorities are just light years ahead of us because the interest is there and the appetite is there. So I would love, to even use this podcast or this media platform to try to push for public transportation. It's just a win-win. There's no downside to it.
Yeah. And again, what a romanticized place to be able to spend a little time. Again, the hotels are already there. Most of the infrastructure is actually still there, so they could do it. And there is Amtrak close by. You can waddle over from it if you wanted to, but it would be really nice to have that piece there and to keep that heartbeat still going.
So at Bellefontaine, what stories stick out to you about our railroad barons?
I have to start with the bad.
Okay.
Because again, you have to walk before you run, you have to crawl before you walk. And in 1855, and so this is decades before we have even Eadsbridge versus Union Station, a tragedy took place on November 1st in 1855, and that's known as the Gasconade train accident. And so there were train lines set up between St. Louis and Kansas City. And on November 1st, 1855, an inaugural run went from St. Louis out, and we had, as we do sometimes, had severe rains. They got to the Gasconade River. They pushed forward on kind of untested rail lines, and it gave way, and 15 of 16 of rail cars tumbled into the Gasconade River, killing 30 St. Louis civilians, and of those 30, 11 are laid to rest with us. And there are some notable. Artemus Bullard is the first Presbyterian minister west of the Mississippi. He lost his life that day. And then John Teasdale, who happens to be Sarah Teasdale, the poet's grandfather, also lost his life that day. So we have these wonderful icons in Eadsbridge and, of course, Union Station, but it's built on the trials and tragedies of what came before.
An amazing piece of history I was not aware of until just maybe 10 years ago was the locomotive for the train that almost made it across that bridge was still there.
It is.
Still stuck in the mud.
And its name is?
Ooh, wait a minute.
The O'Sullivan.
That's what I said, the O'Sullivan.
Yeah.
You are correct, sir. Yes!
So here's yet that other throwback to our folks at Bellefontaine Cemetery. I want you to stop to think about this. We had a severe loss of life, but there were 5 individuals in that engine going across the river. 2 of them survived.
I can't
One
imagine.
of them...
Did they jump?
I'm
not
not sure.
trying
I
to
wasn't
be
there,
funny.
so I don't know how they survived.
Well, I have a
but
story.
Hudson Bridge survived.
And he was in the head end.
He was
wow.
in the engine.
Because he's not an engineer by any stretch.
No, but he was always, he saw this as the next, you said it before, steamboats were giving way, here comes the rail. And so he is there. He put himself there, and he survived it. And he will later go on to help secure funding for Eads Bridge. So, talk about... pick yourself up, scrape your knees a little bit.
I'm sure that stays with you for the rest of your life.
Pick yourself up. The engineer, as with those other 30, lost their life that day. But Hudson Bridge lived another day and is ultimately buried at Bellefontaine Cemetery. And he has this wonderful extra little connection to us. And if you've ever made it to Hotchkiss Chapel and heard our pump organ play, that was a gift from Hudson Bridge.
So the reason I asked about if they jumped, I wasn't trying to be funny. It's that I, as a conductor, my engineer and myself almost had to jump out of a train because of a propane truck crossed into the tracks, and it just stayed there. And
Did
we
it have
were
a bullseye on the side?
It might as well have. We all stood up in the cab of the train and blowing the horn, and it looks like we have a movie. At the very last second, he moved, but we were about ready to jump out.
Wow.
So that's why I asked.
Okay. Yeah, well, like I said, wasn't there, don't know. He survived.
Wow. And isn't there a story, correct me if I'm wrong, about somebody who switched seats?
Yeah, well, that would
And
go
one
back
lived,
to,
one didn't.
go
Did
back
Artemis?
to Artemis Bullard. Prior to crossing the Gasconade, he had to go use the head, as they would use to call it on the facilities of the train, and a gentleman exchanged seats with him. And so that gentleman took his aisle seat, now went to the window, and when Artemis came back, he easily slid into the aisle seat. And unfortunately, Artemis perished in the aisle seat, but the gentleman who had taken the window seat survived.
Yeah. Wow.
So another, kind of pulling back into the look of Union Station, the architecture, one of the most iconic views of it are the allegory windows there, the archway. And I think it's a wonderful representation because they have St. Louis depicted as a woman in the middle, and then she reaches out to San Francisco on one side and New York on the other. And that window was done by a gentleman named George Chambers. And I'll give you only one chance to guess where he's buried at.
So I'm going to say Bellefontaine Cemetery and Arboretum at 4947 West Florissant Avenue in St. Louis.
That is the most precise answer
And I would
I've ever
say
been given.
if you're looking at Hotchkiss Chapel, it would be to the rear left.
Yes, very good.
See, that's a good guess.
That is precise as you can
That's
get.
a good guess.
Can you think of any other things that people might know about Union Station or think they know about Union Station?
Completed in 1894. Prolific architect Theodore Link was the architect he would also design the palaces of metallurgy and mining for the 1904 World's Fair. Many buildings between St. Louis and the southern United States, state of Louisiana. And it's just, it's an iconic building downtown. There's so much history that's passed through there. We could dwell on this for hours and hours.
Yeah.
The whistle stop tours with politicians, just the stories of everyday St. Louisans coming and going, whether it be wartime, whether it be peacetime.
And though those trains would stop, there was still a little something going on there.
In what period?
In the 1980s.
The 1980s. So the cinema classic Escape from New York by John Carpenter was filmed there. Scenes were filmed there.
Yep, throughout. So whenever you get your TV or your DVD going, you can see a little influx of what was in poor shape at that point. But it would not only take a handful of years, and it was revitalized. And I know it more because, again, that was kind of my era as a mall. And so it came back as retail, again, a space very close to where the Blues play. A lot of different shops in there. One that's near and dear to me, you were talking about your past work history. I'll really blow some people's minds with the fact that I worked for the Nature Company. And there was a Nature Company store there. Actually, that was like, out of 140 stores, that was like store number 5. It was so popular there in St. Louis.
The building had a great run. From 1894 to 1978, it was a train terminal. Then it closes for a few years, and in the 80s, it gets a $150 million renovation to become that mall. And Dan, as an employee of the Nature Company and as a Union Station aficionado, did you ever go to the Whispering Arch?
Oh, always. That's whenever you got somebody in from out of town, you had to show them that and teach them that little aspect. And then, a small but still similar situation is the ceiling in Willow Gatehouse. It affects the same way.
Oh.
If you talk into the wall because of that curvature, you'll get that sound back on the other side. So it's got some wonderful acoustics, and it's a neat little connection to the Whispering Arch at Theodore Link's Union Station in St. Louis.
Dan, there's so many great memories about Union Station. In our era,
right?
It was a destination. For one, you got to go downtown,
right?
Which was always an experience in itself. There's, where the Cardinals play, where both Cardinals played, actually, the football and the baseball. Just being around the buzz of downtown was exciting. And then when you got to go into Union Station, this incredibly grandiose structure, there was the people singing as they were making fudge,
slapping fudge. I can hear that sound in my ears right now.
Everybody say, what's that? What's that? Because it's turning fudge. Everybody say, turning fudge. Turning fudge. Say, turning fudge. Turning fudge. What am I doing? Turning fudge. What am I doing? Turning fudge. What am I doing?
And it was always amazing the energy that would create, the group of people who would be there, and just the enthusiasm of those employees. And kind of as time goes on, things kind of chill out a little bit, but there is revitalization there now. And of course we have our wonderful aquarium, and I really have to bring up, which I think is a great homage to the World's Fair, that wonderful Ferris wheel that's there. Just as a little bit of a parallel, the Ferris wheel that was here in St. Louis was at the Columbia Exposition in Chicago, and then was carted down here, put in place. And there was an attempt for a period of time to keep that entertainment piece going separate from the World's Fair, but it just didn't happen, and they eventually did implode it. So to have St. Louis put a Ferris wheel at Union Station is a great homage and a great place to bring people. And the best part about it, they are climate controlled, so you can go on that sucker rain, shine, cold, or hot, and still be comfortable. And I just think it's a great throwback to what was there in 1904, and just creates a great and wonderful place for people to come back to. And when you go up the Ferris wheel, if you time it just right, you can maybe see the St. Louis Soccer Club practicing in their practice field, or maybe even catch a game taking place. So what was fades, what is, and what will be. And I really do think that's one of the things I'm proud about St. Louis is we don't just throw everything out. I've lived in other cities where everything's tore down every 20 years and they build anew. But here we have that juxtaposition of old and new, and we try and revitalize those buildings. And for the last 175 years, Bellefontaine has been there too, to help record all of these passings and people who took part in it.
It would be neat to see, it would be neat to hear some stories of Bellefontaine residents and their experiences at Union Station. Dan, you had told me about a story from the 1904 World's Fair where a very young couple, a man and a woman, came from two different parts of the country. They came to St. Louis for the fair. They met at the fair. They fell in love at the fair. They got married. And then just as the fair was closing, the gentleman was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he was shot by one of the Jefferson guards in a scuffle, and so he died at the fair.
Yeah, that's John Backhouse,
Backhouse.
Who was one of the reenactors for the exhibit that was going in place for the Boer War reenactment, which was this wonderful piece that you could go see the Boer War take place every 45 minutes or so. They even had the horses trained that when you snapped your fingers, they'd lay over and play dead, and then they'd reset and shoot the whole thing over again. Part of the problem, though, was the fact that they actually used people who participated in the Boer War to reenact it, and these guys didn't get along all the time, and so a fight did break out in mid-November, and fisticuffs would lead to the Jefferson Guards coming in, and a particular Jefferson Guard withdrew his sidearm, and John Backhouse was shot and later would pass. But in the back of my mind, I do think that his then future wife that he would have met on April 30th, 1904, probably came to St. Louis by way of train because she had been from Iowa, had for the most recent years been in a hotel out in California. So there we go back to that allegory window of George Chambers, San Francisco shaking hands with St. Louis. She comes here and meets the man of her dreams, who happens to be a British soldier.
You know, so that couple came here with just high hopes and aspirations to visit the fair. The 20 million people who visited the fair, many of them came through Union Station.
They had to.
The President of the United States, all the dignitaries would come to St. Louis on a railroad.
And then the Wabash actually had a spur from Union Station out to the terminal at the World's Fair. So no matter what train you came in on, you pretty much had that last little spike of the Wabash. And they even did a special little terminal there at Delmar. And a lot of people will jump to the conclusion that the Delmar train station that's there now is what we're talking about for 1904. That's not it. That came later. It was a much more robust structure that was a little closer to the fairgrounds. But again, just a wonderful connection to a lot of things. So just if you stop to think about it, you got the breadcrumbs of the Eads Bridge, Union Station, 1904 World's Fair, the revitalization of it in the 1980s, another nice revitalization in our current decade that brings us the St. Louis Aquarium, that Ferris wheel, and so it's still here.
So I thought the Union Station in Indianapolis was the first Union Station in the United States.
Some people will say that Columbia Union Station, which was finally finished in 1851, had more of the elements. But when it comes down to size and scale, our Union Station definitely beat that one. But if you really want to go and split some hairs, and it's not in the United States, but it's actually in Toronto, their Union Station used to serve 72 million people annually. So I think it's all sometimes about the way you look at it. The most important thing to glean from it is a very important piece of architecture in St. Louis, and was instrumental to all of those people, whether it be going off to fight in World War II, our wonderful World's Fair, and I know you know of a plethora of people at Bellefontaine Cemetery that kick back to this wonderful piece of architecture.
Yeah. I think I can prove with complicated math that ours is the prettiest Union Station.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's called St. Louis math. I can prove that. So no, Bellefontaine Cemetery, you're going to find many, of course, firsts. But the people who were, the many executives who ran the Wabash Railroad and made that a success of what it was. The founders of the Merchants Railroad, one of the landscape architects for contemporary Canadian National Railroad, the founder of the Alton Chicago Railroad, who also was a close business partner with Pullman for the Pullman Rail Car Company, George Pullman, who we visited in Graceland Cemetery just a couple months ago.
And then, of course, you've got all those people with the St. Louis Car Company that are laid to rest with
Mr. Bixby.
Bixby.
Oh, my gosh, Mr. Bixby, ACF Industries.
And here we are, a stone's throw away from that art museum, which he had such a hand. So isn't it fun how these connections kind of circle back around?
Oh, we're definitely at the epicenter of coincidence in St. Louis, right at the Visitor Center of Forest Park.
But I can really dig it.
I can dig it.
Thanks for listening to the podcast, and please share this episode with your family and friends. If you got value from the episode as well as the podcast, you can do it right from the platform you are listening on. Take a screenshot and tag us and tag yourself. We are at Podcast Can You Dig It on Instagram.